The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a whip crack, sharp and dripping with contempt as she stood over the teenager in seat 14C and demanded for the third time, "I said put your bag under the seat now. Are you deaf or just stupid?" 16-year-old Amara Johnson flinched at the words, her hands shaking as she tried to maneuver her backpack into the too small space beneath the seat in front of her. And she felt the heat of every passenger's stare burning into her back as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. The backpack wouldn't fit properly because it contained her laptop and textbooks for the academic competition she was traveling to, the regional STEM championship, where she'd be competing against students from 15 states. But the flight attendant didn't ask why it wouldn't fit or offer to help find overhead bin space like Amara had seen her do for other passengers during boarding. Instead, the woman, whose name tag read Patricia, crossed her arms and raised her voice even louder, making sure everyone in the surrounding rows could hear. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. These discount tickets bring in passengers who don't know how to follow basic instructions, who don't understand airline etiquette, who think the rules don't apply to them." The racist implication hung in the air unspoken but unmistakable. The way Patricia emphasized "these passengers" while staring at Amara's dark skin and natural hair. The way she'd singled out the only black teenager in first class, even though Amara had watched at least 4 other passengers struggle with overhead bins without receiving this level of hostility. Amara wanted to explain that her ticket wasn't discounted, that her parents had saved for months to buy her this first-class seat because the competition was the biggest opportunity of her life, and they wanted her to arrive rested and confident, that she'd been accepted to MIT early admission and was probably going to achieve more in her life than Patricia could imagine. But the words stuck in her throat because she was 16 and scared and didn't know how to fight back against an adult who wielded authority like a weapon. Patricia bent down, her face inches from Amara's, and hissed in a voice that was somehow more threatening for being quiet. "One more problem from you, and I'll have the captain turn this plane around. I don't care if you miss your little trip. We have standards on this airline, and passengers who can't follow simple directions don't belong in first class." The threat landed like a physical blow, and Amara felt her dreams of the competition, of showing her parents their sacrifice was worth it, of proving to her school and her community that a black girl from the South Side could compete with anyone, all of it crumbling because this flight attendant had decided she was a problem that needed to be managed rather than a passenger deserving of basic respect. She fumbled with her phone, her vision blurry with tears she refused to let fall, and pulled up the boarding pass to show once again that yes, her seat was correct, yes, her ticket was legitimate. But Patricia barely glanced at it before turning away with a dismissive wave. "I don't need to see it again. I need you to follow instructions like everyone else. Now sit down, be quiet, and don't cause any more disruptions." As Patricia stalked back toward the galley, Amara heard whispers from nearby passengers, some sympathetic murmurs about how unfair it was, others agreeing that young people these days didn't respect authority. And she felt simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, reduced to either a victim deserving pity or a problem deserving discipline. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a text from her mother asking if she'd boarded okay, and Amara stared at the message wondering how to explain what was happening, how to put into words the specific humiliation of being treated like you're stealing space you paid for, like you're inherently more likely to cause problems than passengers who look different than you. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "Boarding was fine, love you," because her mother was at work and couldn't do anything to help, and Amara didn't want to ruin her parents' day with problems she thought she should be able to handle herself. But as the plane pushed back from the gate and Patricia began the safety demonstration with a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she glanced in Amara's direction, the teenager made a decision that would change everything. Amara pulled up her father's contact information, her finger hovering over the call button as she debated whether this was worth bothering him, whether she was overreacting, whether causing more trouble would just make things worse. But then she remembered Patricia's words about turning the plane around and removing her, and she pressed dial before she could talk herself out of it. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice warm and concerned because he knew she should be in the air by now. Baby girl, everything okay? I thought you'd be flying." Amara's voice came out smaller than she intended, cracking slightly as she tried to keep her emotions under control. "Dad, I need help. The flight attendant has been yelling at me since I got on the plane. She's threatening to have me removed. She's treating me like I'm a criminal for just trying to sit in my seat." She heard her father's sharp intake of breath, heard the change in his voice from concerned parent to something harder, more focused. "Tell me exactly what happened, every detail." So Amara did, keeping her voice low so other passengers wouldn't hear, describing Patricia's escalating hostility, the comments about discount tickets and passengers who don't belong, the threat to turn the plane around. And as she talked, she heard her father's breathing get slower and more controlled in the way it did when he was managing his anger. What Amara didn't know, what her parents had carefully kept from her because they didn't want her to feel different or to rely on anyone's authority but her own, was that her father, Marcus Johnson, wasn't just an attorney like she'd always believed. He was the general counsel for the Federal Aviation Administration, the top lawyer responsible for regulatory enforcement and compliance for every airline operating in United States airspace. When Amara finished her story, her father was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd rarely heard. "Amara, I need you to stay calm and stay safe. Don't engage with this flight attendant anymore. Don't give her any reason to escalate. But I need the flight number and the name of the crew member who's been harassing you." Amara rattled off the information, and she heard her father's keyboard clicking in the background as he pulled up records. "Okay, baby, I need to make some calls, but I want you to know that what's happening to you is not okay. It's not your fault, and it's about to be addressed at the highest level. I love you, and I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself by calling me." As the call ended, Amara sat back in her seat, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety because she'd never heard her father sound quite like that, professional and angry and determined all at once, and she wondered what highest level meant. She didn't have to wonder long because 15 minutes into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that made the entire cabin go silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I've just received a priority call from FAA leadership regarding a serious compliance issue on this flight. We are being directed to return to the gate immediately. All crew members are to cease passenger interactions except for safety essential communications, and upon arrival we will be met by federal investigators and airline management. Passengers, please remain calm. This is not a security threat, but we are required to comply with FAA directives without delay." The cabin erupted in confused murmurs and complaints, passengers pulling out phones to check connections and make new arrangements, and Amara watched Patricia's face drain of all color as she stood frozen in the galley, clearly understanding that something catastrophic was happening, but not yet grasping that she was the cause. As the plane taxied back to the gate, another flight attendant, a young man named David, who had been kind to Amara during boarding, approached her seat with an expression of deep concern. "Miss Johnson, I've been instructed to ensure you're comfortable and that no crew members approach you for any reason. Can I get you anything? Water? A snack?" Amara shook her head mutely, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in how she was being treated, and David lowered his voice. "I want you to know that I witnessed how Patricia spoke to you, and it was completely unacceptable. I should have said something earlier, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that. What she did was wrong, and I'll be providing a full statement to the investigators." When the plane stopped at the gate, a team of people in business attire boarded immediately, their credentials identifying them as FAA investigators and airline executives, and Amara watched as Patricia was escorted off the plane first, her earlier confidence completely shattered as she stumbled over explanations and excuses that no one seemed interested in hearing. A woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression approached Amara's seat and introduced herself as the airline's chief operating officer. Miss Johnson, on behalf of this airline, I want to apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you received from our crew member. We take these matters very seriously, and I can assure you that appropriate action will be taken. We would like to arrange alternative transportation for you to your destination in one of our premium aircraft with a hand-selected crew, all expenses covered, and we'd like to discuss additional compensation for this traumatic experience. But before Amara could respond, another figure appeared at the front of the cabin, and her breath caught as she recognized her father, still in his suit from work but with his tie loosened and his face showing the strain of the last 30 minutes. He walked straight to her seat, and she stood up and fell into his arms, finally letting the tears fall now that she was safe. Marcus held his daughter for a long moment before turning to address the assembled airline executives and investigators. And when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who could ground every plane in their fleet with a single directive. Gentlemen, ladies, here's what's going to happen. My daughter will complete her journey to the STEM competition she's worked so hard to qualify for, and she'll do so in comfort and safety with crew members who understand that every passenger, regardless of age or race, deserves respect. Your airline will conduct a comprehensive review of crew member Patricia Williams' employment history, and I suspect you'll find this is not an isolated incident, but a pattern of discriminatory behavior that your management failed to address. You will implement mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees. You will revise your passenger complaint procedures to ensure incidents of discrimination are escalated immediately, and you will submit quarterly reports to my office demonstrating measurable improvement in how complaints from passengers of color are handled. Furthermore, you will establish a passenger bill of rights that explicitly prohibits discrimination and creates clear consequences for employees who violate those standards. This incident represents a failure at every level of your organization, from the crew member who felt entitled to harass a child to the systems that allowed her behavior to go unchecked. And you will address those failures comprehensively, or you will face regulatory consequences that will cost you significantly more than the settlement you're about to offer my daughter. The COO nodded, her face pale but determined. Mr. Johnson, we understand completely, and we accept all your requirements. We want to make this right. Marcus looked down at Amara, and his voice softened. The only person who gets to decide what makes this right is my daughter. She's the one who was harmed. She's the one who has to live with this experience. So let's hear what she needs.
What you just witnessed is more than a story about one racist flight attendant getting fired. It's a window into the daily reality that young people of color face when they dare to occupy spaces that society has decided don't belong to them. Amara Johnson is 16 years old, brilliant enough to earn admission to MIT, and talented enough to compete in a national STEM championship. But none of those achievements protected her from being verbally abused and threatened by an adult who saw her skin color and immediately decided she was a problem. Think about what that does to a young person's sense of self-worth. To be told through words and actions that you don't belong, that you're inherently more likely to cause trouble, that your presence in first class must be a mistake or a handout rather than something your family sacrificed to provide. And think about how common this experience is. How many brilliant young people are having their confidence eroded and their dreams questioned by adults who wield authority like a weapon against anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of who deserves respect. Patricia Williams didn't just insult one teenager. She represented a system that consistently underestimates and devalues young people of color, that assumes they're less intelligent, less capable, less deserving of basic human dignity. The fact that Amara's father happened to have the power to shut down an entire airline and demand accountability is extraordinary. But the fact that such power was necessary to get justice is a damning indictment of how these situations typically end.
Most teenagers in Amara's position don't have parents who can make one call and summon federal investigators. They suffer through the harassment. They internalize the message that they don't belong. They learn to make themselves smaller and quieter to avoid becoming targets. And the Patricia Williams of the world face no consequences and continue treating passengers the same way.
If this story made you angry, if you felt protective of Amara and satisfied when accountability finally arrived, then I need you to channel those feelings into action. Share this video because it illustrates that racism doesn't skip a generation, that young people face the same biases their parents and grandparents faced, just wrapped in different language and expressed through different mechanisms. Comment below with your own experiences of being underestimated or witnessing young people being treated as problems rather than promise. Because creating a record of these stories, building evidence of patterns that can't be dismissed as isolated incidents, that's how we create pressure for systemic change. Subscribe if you believe that amplifying stories of both injustice and accountability can shift cultural expectations about what behavior will be tolerated. If you want to be part of a community that refuses to normalize the harassment of children, if you think the next generation deserves better than what previous generations endured, and most importantly, the next time you witness an adult treating a young person with disrespect or cruelty, especially if that young person is black or brown, be David. Be the flight attendant who wished he'd spoken up sooner but at least provided testimony when it mattered. Or better yet, be the person who intervenes in the moment, who uses whatever authority or voice you have to say, "This child deserves respect. This treatment is unacceptable. This stops right now." Amara will probably carry this experience for the rest of her life, but she'll also carry the knowledge that her father fought for her, that some adults recognized the injustice and tried to make it right, that her voice mattered enough to shut down an entire airline until justice was served. Every young person deserves to know their dignity matters that much. And it's up to all of us to create a world where they don't have to rely on powerful parents to defend their basic right to exist without harassment.